Good morning, or depending when you're listening to this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross and I was always told I had a voice radio, so I've made a podcast all about the Pokémon trading card game, and you're listening to PTCG Radio. Now, very, very small apology to start off this week. I did promise you guys some recorded games with commentary from both the Norwich and Sheffield League challenges from last weekend. And long story short, I'm in Cornwall with my lovely girlfriend and my equally lovely family this week. And unfortunately, the stuff I need to record those videos I've left in where I work. So unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to get them up this week, but I'll get a whole bunch up next week. You will get them, don't worry. Also coming next week, you will have a top 10 cards from Breakthrough. You know I do one of these videos whenever a new set is released. Sometimes I'm fairly accurate, sometimes I'm wildly inaccurate, but that's kind of the fun of these things. So check all those out on youtube.com/PTCGRadio. There's coming on for 200 videos on there now of various descriptions with games and deck breakdowns and all kinds of good stuff. So there is a whole bunch of fun stuff to get onto, ladies and gentlemen. Don't you worry about that. And new videos coming next week. I referred to Empoleon as adding damage from Stage 1s last week. Clearly it's basics. That was very, very silly of me. But these little things happen when you put out a couple hours of content every single week. There are going to be some mistakes. I hope you can all forgive me. So, what are we going to do this week? I'll tell you what we're going to do this week. We're going to talk about a couple very small bits of news. I'm going to be honest, it's not terribly exciting on the news front. We are going to look at a bunch of trainers from Breakthrough. Now, the reason we're looking at some of the trainers is because I've taken you very recently through Red Flash and Blue Impact, the two Japanese sets that became our English set of Breakthrough. So I don't need to go through the EXs and all the other Pokemon. We've been through those very, very recently. What we do need to go through, however, is some of the supporters which have been, and trainers which have been reprinted, because I can give you quite a bit of insight on them, given that I played when they were around last time. Then we're going to be having a look at a couple of emails, and if we get chance, we're going to be having a chat about Giratina EX. Hasn't really found his place in the format in the first couple of months after the release of Ancient Origins. I believe it was Ancient Origins. But he is, I think, going on forward now as we start getting a whole bunch of tournaments in the standard format. UK Regionals start on the 7th of November. That is not this weekend, but the weekend after. It's in Huddersfield. Don't worry, ladies and gentlemen, I shall be there. So you'll have a full report from that. And I'll tell you more about this next week, but we are hoping to be able to live stream. And if I don't make Top Cut next week, and given that I generally play silly decks and don't take tournaments as seriously as other people, I probably won't make Top Cut. But I will, if I don't make Top Cut, be live streaming Top Cut with commentary, so that'll be good. I'll tell you about that next week. I'll give you all the details, and as always, check my Twitter at the Wassy. If you're not following me on Twitter yet, I do have to ask the question of why you're not, but get yourself on there, get following me on Twitter, and I will give you all the updates you need. Well, I mean on Twitter, I'm assuming you saw where I was going with that. So yeah, lots of fun stuff coming up, starting with a quick little I suppose a little fact. Did you know this is not the first time the Pokemon TCG have used Breakthrough? Breakthrough was actually a theme deck in the EX Delta species set, focusing around grass and lightning, and it was Crobat, or Crobat Delta I suppose to be more specific, which was the kind of, I suppose, the key Pokemon there, the kind of headline Pokemon in that particular theme deck. Boom. Knowledge. The more you know. So, starting off with some news this week, we have seen the Mega Blaziken and Mega Swampert Pin Blister Packs. They're going to be coming out on January the 4th. They're going to cost $15. They're going to be costing £10 in the UK. And you're going to be getting the free booster packs and a pin of the Pokemon. As we have seen, quite frankly, we've seen a few of these now, so you know what you're going to be expecting. Similarly, I've told you a couple of times that we're going to be getting a Break Evolution box. It is now going to be $30, not $40 as it was originally listed. You're thinking about 20 quid in the UK. And it is going to have Empoleon Break, Beheon Break, and Noctowl Break. So yeah, pretty gosh darn cool, because we were having discussions as to which break Pokemon we were going to get. While we're here, actually, it has now, obviously, now that we've seen the set list, we can confirm the break Pokemon coming in Breakthrough are Chestnut Break, who's pretty terrible, Raichu Break, who some people like more than me, Marowak Break, who's interesting, Zoroark Break, who is by far the best one released so far, Florges Break, which has a nice ability but not on a stage 3, and Noivern Break. And I did tell you this last week, but the EXs we're going to be getting our Houndoom and Mega Houndoom, Glalie and Mega Glalie, and both the Mewtwo's and both the Mega Mewtwo's. It was a little while here where we were slightly confused about which ones we'd be getting. I now can confirm that they are the ones in the set. And we know that Beheeyem and Empoleon and Noctowl are going to be coming in that box. Whether we're going to need, 4 of those at any point, you're going to have to buy 4 boxes. That could be annoying, but, at least you'll get some packs with the box as well. To answer a ruling query that I know a lot of you will know the answer to, but not everyone will. So just to confirm, people have been asking, are you going to be able to have 4 Empoleon Break? Or are you going to be forced into a 2-2 line? The name is Empoleon Break. And because the name is Empoleon Break, you can run a 4-4 line. Just like if you look at something like Mega Lucario, Lucario is called Lucario EX, and the Mega is called Mega Lucario EX. The rule is if it's got the same, if it's got the same name, then you can't have more than 4. If it's got a different name, you're off the hook. So, for instance, if you wanted to play, you could play 2 of the colourless, 2 of the Dragon Rayquaza, and then 2 of the colourless, 2 of the Dragon Mega Rayquaza, because you'd only be playing 4 Rayquaza, 4 Mega Rayquaza. I know a lot of you already knew that, but I thought it was worth having a quick look at the beginning. And that really is it in terms of news for this week. I'm sorry to break it to you. Get it? Breakthrough. You're welcome. But it's not been a particularly fast week in terms of news. But there's a whole bunch of item cards from Breakthrough. So what I'm going to do is have a look at some of these item cards. Now, Parallel Stadium we looked at when we looked. Essentially, all the ones that came in Blue Impact or Red Flash. Have a look at my old podcast called Blue Impact and Red Flash. You'll see a full discussion of all of those. These are the trainers which came from the Raichu and Noivern Break decks, which were not covered on on those podcasts. Some of them I have talked about before, some of them I haven't. So let's just go through all of them here for completeness. So, first things first, Buddy Buddy Rescue. This comes from the Raichu Break Evolution Pack in Japan. And it reads, each player puts a Pokemon from his or her discard pile into his or her hand. It is incredibly useful because unlike things like Revive or Sacred Ash, it puts it not onto your bench, not into your deck, but into your hand. Think something like a Hooper EX or a Shaman EX that you can immediately put down and use the ability. Or think about a stage 1 that you can get back in your hand. It says Pokemon, not basic Pokemon. So you can put that Pokemon into your hand and immediately evolve your benched Pokemon. Big downside, of course, so can your opponent. It helps your opponent, but there are some really good uses for this. It does things that other cards don't do. But if you're looking to reuse a Shaman, the chances are your opponent will be able to do that too. In fact, the reality is that most of the time when you use this card, your opponent is going to get a fairly big benefit as well. Now, another card we're getting a reprint of Fisherman. Now, this was last printed in Heart Gold Soul Silver. So, if you weren't playing when Heart Gold Soul Silver was legal, you'll never have played with this card before. It also came out in Skyridge, which was even before my time. I say even before, like I've been playing for so long. This comes from the Raichu Break Evolution Pack, and it's well, let's read it, shall we? Put 4 basic energy cards from your discard pile into your hand. Now, we've got, I think it's called Energy Recycler, which we had in the last set. So, that put 5 energy into your deck. So, the question is this actually any better? Now, it is called Energy Recycler, I was correct, and it was from Ancient Origins. Now, on the one hand, this is 4 basic energy, not 5 basic energy, and it's still basic energy, not energy, so, is it really any better? And the answer is in some decks. Fisherman is very, very good for decks that can play more than one energy from their hand in any given turn. So to use a modern example, Mega Skeptile that can put down 2 energy while they attack, that would be really, really good with Fisherman, because it allows you to just pick up 4 with Fisherman, put 2 down this turn, 2 down next turn. You can guarantee you've got enough energy to make the most of that attack. Similarly, if anyone's going to play the Magnezone, which allows you to put down as many electric energies you like per turn, Fisherman will be incredibly useful with that Magnezone, because it's going to allow you to make sure you've got 4 in hand to put down. By the way, for those people asking, is Magnezone Raichu going to become a thing? No. Essentially, the only reason Blastoise was so good was because Keldeo could take a few hits, and you had the rush-in ability, and you had... first you had the Squirtle that could protect itself on the bench, and then you had Archie's Ace in the hole. Magnezone just is a standard stage 2. No good basic, no Archie's Ace in the hole equivalent, no awesome rush-in ability, 120 HP, so it's going to get killed very, very quickly. I could go on, but for all of those reasons, and to be honest, probably more, it's just not particularly good. Magnezone Raikou, I just don't think it's going to be a good deck. I know that when you've attached an electric energy to it, damage is reduced by 20. I am aware of that. I know it's got the same attack as Keldeo, but for the reasons I've just said, I don't think it's going to be very good. So, is Fisherman going to be good? Now, there are 2 things working in Fisherman's favour now. And that's the way we play the game, the engines that we're using. When I say engine, I'm referring to the way our deck works. So our engine at the moment revolves around Trainer's Mail and Shaymin and Ultra Ball and Hooper, and very few draw supporters. Whereas in Heart Gold Soul Silver, we were using a lot more draw supporters to get us going. So, in terms of Fisherman, first of all, a lot of people nowadays are using VS Seeker and Battle Compressor, which is making it very, very easy at the moment to play one-off supporters and get them used. Loads of people most people in fact, play 2 Lysandra in their deck, and because of the 4 VS Seeker, it's very, very easy to get it out as and when you want it. Certainly I could see Fisherman played in expanded Blastoise decks just as a one-off, so that even under under Trainer Lock you can use Fisherman to reuse your energy, or just it gives you another way to reuse your energy other than superior energy retrieval. The other thing that's really helping is, like I say, we are using a lot of Trainer's Mail, Ultra Ball, Shaymin, etc. We are drawing without supporters more than we used to, which means that we can afford to play non-draw supporters more than we used to, which means that we can, play stuff like Fisherman and not worry too much. So, could be useful, but really Fisherman is only useful in decks that attach multiple energies from their hand every turn. There aren't many of them that are big at the moment. Blastoise and Expanded does come to mind, however, and if something like Mega Skeptile or Magnezone ever became big, then Fisherman would become big again. The other supporter we haven't seen since the Heart Gold Soul Silver era, which actually came out in Unleashed for the very first and only time, is Judge. Now, firstly, humorous because you can announce Judge very loudly, and then then the Judge comes over and you're like, I was playing the Judge card. We've all heard that joke, let's move on. Judge makes, and this comes from the Neuven Break Evolution Pack, Judge makes every player shuffle his or her hand into his or her deck and draw 4 cards. Sweet. That's very, very good. Oh, and just as a quick trivia note, it's basically the same as Desert Shaman from Skyridge, except Desert Shaman allowed you to draw up to 4 cards, Judge forces you to draw 4 cards. So, it's kind of like ending both of you to 4 at the same time. Why would you want to use this? There are a couple of reasons. Firstly, it is turn 1 disruption. And we don't see much turn 1 disruption. Look at something like Ace Trainer. You can put your opponent down to 3 cards, but only when you're behind on prizes. You ain't going to be using Ace Trainer turn 1. So that's very, very useful. The other, and again, it only works kind of early on. Now, it does do not very nice things to Mind Shao, because one of the, and I told you about this last week. Go back and listen to last week's podcast if you missed it to learn more about Mind Shao. But essentially, Mind Shao doesn't like you shuffling your... Mind Shao doesn't like to be forced to shuffle your hand back in your deck, or the Mind Shao player. That was not very good phrasing. Again, I could go back and alter it, but why? Let's just leave it in. Make it organic. And the irony is, the second I said that, I then started going off on one and had to go back and actually edit something out. At which point I could have edited the previous thing out, but I'm not doing so. I like to think it adds to the rustic charm of this podcast. Audio quality's quite good. Rambly podcasting man, not quite as tight as he could be, but I think that adds to the charm. It could be, if I just don't want to. Simple as that. Anyway, back to Mind Shao. You attack with Mind Shao, use Aero Turn, you've got the Mind Fu, Mind Shao, and then hopefully Strong Energy and either Focus Ash or Muscle Band in your hand. If your opponent then judges you, that all goes back into the deck, and because you only draw 4 cards, that lowers the chance of you drawing back into it. Now, when you're down to 1 or 2 cards remaining, 1 or 2 prizes remaining, then Judge is less effective for your opponent to use against you. The other good way that Judge works is, well, let's take an example, Glalie EX's Instant Cooling. Double colourless and water energy, 50 damage. If you have the same number of cards in your hand as your opponent, this attack does 100 more damage. Awesome. That's really quite cool. What that means is that, I'm only doing 50 damage. How do you get the same number of cards in your hand as your opponent? Play a Judge. Now, we saw this with Yanmega Prime. This was big when Judge was released originally. Yanmega Prime had a poker body, a passive ability. It used to be that passive abilities were poker bodies and active abilities were poker powers. Now they're all just abilities. But it had a poker body, which meant that it attacked for free if you could match hand sizes with your opponent. So people, and Magnazone Yanmega was a big deck for quite a while. And what would happen were that people would play the Yanmega deck, and they would play for Judge to try and make sure that they could match hand sizes with their opponent. It was very useful indeed. Glalie could really take advantage of that. And I've made no secret of my love for Glalie and Mega Glalie coming out of this set. I want to make it work with Vileplume. I don't know if I'm going to be able to, but oh my goodness, I really want to try. Or just a Speed Glalie deck, or Glalie Regice or something. I don't know. I haven't thought it through properly. But I'm going to be buying a bunch of Glalie and Mega Glalie EXs when the set comes out, just so I can try and make something of it. Downside of Judge, it screws you over early game, and it doesn't screw your opponent over enough late game. So Judge isn't really a card you're going to want to play as a 4 of in every deck. It's going to be played as a 4 of if it can help you with a particular strategy you're employing, like matching hand sizes with Glalie, or like screwing over your opponent early game. Now, in terms of screwing over your opponent early game, the best decks for this, and I don't know how much I agree with this, but it's something people have been saying the last few days since it became official that Judge was going to be in the set. It's really good for the old big basics decks. So you've got these decks that rely on, think of Lucario as an example. 1 energy, 30 damage, off you go. Simple. But the problem is that those decks often don't run through their deck quickly enough. You don't draw enough cards. So when you Judge yourself down to 4, you end up with a really big deck, and then you end up not being able to draw enough cards, and you draw dead for a little while. However, because I used to play these big basic decks a lot, so I can speak from experience. Back in the day, we had Tornadus EX from Dark Explorers, and we had Landorus from Boundaries Crossed, and all these good Pokemon. And if you got judged early game, it really, really hurt, because you didn't run through your deck very quickly. It wasn't like a Blastoise deck where you'd constantly be putting down Pokemon, putting down energy, playing rare candy, etc. There'd just be some Pokemon, some energy, some lasers, some muscle bands, etc. So, well, some tools, shall we say. Moving on then. Will it work now? Well, now, like I said about Fisherman, we've got our acro bikes, our trainers now. Might be less of an issue now. Certainly, it's something to consider. If you're playing an aggro deck, something like a Lucario-based deck, putting a couple Judge, and again, because of VS Seeker, you don't need to play 4 Judge. You can get away with 1 or 2 and rely on Versus Seeker. And what you can basically do is just play a couple of them to disrupt your opponent. If you're sitting there hammering with 50 or 70 with Lucario for 1 energy, your opponent really isn't going to be able to afford a slow start. And that's what Judge can give them. Essentially, think of how many times you've played these bruising cards and your opponent's had a slow start and you've won based off that. Judge can guarantee that slow start. Reserve Ticket. This is a brand new card from the Neuven Break Evolution Pack in Japan. Flip a coin, if head, search your deck for a card, then put that card on top of it. It's computer search but instead of discarding 2 cards, it's a coin flip. This really follows a theme we've seen in the Pokemon trading card game for years now. Ridiculously good trainer cards on a coin flip. Think how good the automatic sleep on Hypnotoxic Laser was. Think about something like Pokemon Catcher or Pokemon Reversal with a coin flip. Think about Super Scoop Up on a coin flip. Here's the thing though. This is actually better than some of them because Super Scoop Up was just replaced with an A-Spec without the flip. Whereas, something like Lysandra is just Pokemon Catcher without the flip. Well, here, not only do they add the flip, but they actually make it easier and then add the flip. So it's actually slightly comparatively more powerful. This is more powerful compared to Computer Search than Super Scoop Up is to Scoop Up Cyclone. I hope that made sense. I feel like I didn't explain that very well, but I can't think of another way to say it. Point is this, it's very simple. This card is insanely good if you flip heads, and a wasted spot in your deck if you flip tails. Just like Super Scoop Up. Just like Pokemon Catcher. If you feel lucky, pop it in. It's really, really good trainer draw. Now, something that should be mentioned, it doesn't go to your hand, which I suppose actually makes it less powerful than Computer Search again, but it goes on top of your deck. But all you need is an acro bike, or a bicycle, or a sycamore, or anything that draws cards. And we have a Shaman, so it's really not the end of the world. Do make sure, though, don't use a reserve ticket and then Ultra Ball for a Shaman to draw the card, because you'll have to shuffle after the Shaman draw. That might sound stupid. With these, put your card on top of the deck. I've seen people do it in the wrong order before, and they've had to shuffle their deck in order to get the card that searches for what they just put on top of their deck, and that, of course, doesn't work. We've got Super Rod back. Super Rod ain't been gone for very long, ladies and gentlemen. Super Rod was last printed in Dragon Vault, which got rotated not very long ago, and now it's back in Breakthrough from the Neuven Break Evolution Pack. And it allows you to put 3 in any combination of Pokemon and basic energy from your discard pile back into your deck. This was, it used to be called Night Maintenance. And even before that, Nightly Garbage Run from Team Rocket. It has, in the past, as both Night Maintenance and Super Rod, been insanely good. Nowadays, if you want Pokemon, we've got Sacred Ash, 5 Pokemon in your discard. We've got Energy Recycler, 5 basic energy in your deck. Both get from your discard pile into your deck. And now we got Super Rod, which is only 3 but allows you a combination. More flexibility but slightly less power behind the card. But it's also really good for, let's say, something along the lines of a Vespiquen deck. You might want to put 1 Pokemon back in the deck, say a Shaman to draw some cards, or 1 Vespiquen, but then you might not want to put more than 1 back in, because then you won't have enough Pokemon in the discard pile to do Bee Revenge for enough damage. Well, that's alright, ladies and gentlemen, because you can put 1 Pokemon back, that 1 Vespiquen you want, and put back a couple of basic energy, so you're not stunting the power of Bee Revenge by putting extra Pokemon back in. It's gonna see play. It's absolutely going to see play. It always has, and it always will. And the last trainer I want to talk about today is Town Map. Now, this has only just been rotated as well. It came out in Boundaries Crossed. It's been reprinted in the Raichu Break Evolution Pack, so we get it in Breakthrough. you put all of your prize cards face up, and they remain face up. One thing, and this is really, really good, for, it was almost a must-play in decks like Virizion Genesect, where you needed your G-Booster, or Durant, where you needed to have all 4 Durants. It's seen quite a lot of play and expanded in decks like Night March, where you need your 4 double colourless and you need all of your Night Marches. It's going to see play in some decks. It's a good card. Not every deck, but some decks, especially decks where there's a particular card you need. I can see this being a one-of in Vesperquen decks where you need your 4 DCE really badly. Or you might need your 1 Jolteon to allow you to hit for weakness against Rayquaza decks, for instance. It's just plain a very good card. One thing I must warn you about with Town Map, it gives your opponent information. I ended up with, when I was at Nationals, not this past year when I commentated, but the year before, I played the Diamond Minecart himself, Dan Middleton, in round 2. I was 1-0 at Nationals. It was going swimmingly. I was playing Virizion Genesect. I draw my town map very early on. I want to play it rather than Juniper it away, so I play my town map. I haven't searched my deck. I don't know what my prizes are, but I'd rather play it than Juniper it away. And I play it, and my G-Booster's in the prizes, at which point Dan does exactly what he should have done. He moves all his energy onto his Mewtwo, runs through me, and there's nothing I can do because I cannot one-hit KO the Mewtwo because I don't have the G-Booster, and Dan knows he wins. He wins game 2, I'm ahead in game 3, but it runs out of time before we finish, and I end up with a draw on what should have been a win. Point is, be very careful playing Town Map. You might give your opponent information as to what is prized, which they can later use against you. Yeah, there we go. So they are some trainers from Breakthrough, which I hadn't talked about as much as I could have, so I thought was worth a chat today. Now, what I want to talk about quickly before we finish on an email or two is Giratina EX. Now, Giratina EX is a very useful Pokemon. It's got an ability which makes it immune to attacks from Mega Pokemon, and both Mega Rayquaza and Mega Groudon are big at the moment, but Mega Glalie could become very, very useful, and Mega Sceptile sees play here and there. So having immunity to them is good. Now, I say immunity, I must point out, of course, that we have Hex Maniac nowadays, and we've got Silent Lab. Now, as we're going to say in a minute, Giratina EX's attack stops your opponent putting down stadiums, but that's not to say that they won't have put it down and you won't be able to find one instead. But let's say Silent Lab can't be used, we've got Hex Maniac. So your opponent plays Hex Maniac, turns off your ability for a turn, then they can KO you with a Mega Pokemon, so a Mega EX. So it does need to be borne in mind. And it's got a really useful attack, essentially for 2 coloured, 2 colourless, you're going to use it with Double Dragon, which does 100 damage and stops your opponent playing trainer item tools, just tools, not trainers, tools, special energy, or stadiums for their next turn. So against something like Mine Shao, for instance, it completely shuts it down because your opponent can't play Strong Energy or Focus Sash / Muscle Band or Fighting Stadium the following turn. And what it does is it shuts down decks. It shuts down Mega EX decks, and it sits there and stops you using Pokemon tools, and it stops you using stadiums and all that good stuff, special energy. So you play against a Groudon, for instance, and it stops your Groudon being able to kill you, or the Mega Groudon. Okay, they can use Hex Maniac to kill you. But while you're attacking, no strong energy. No stadiums. And if there's no stadium down, remember, Mega Groudon only does 100, not 200. So your Mega Groudon attacks once, you then bring up a second Giratina, and then you can just sit there, and your opponent can't one-hit you, so every Hex Maniac doesn't get a one-hit KO. That's very, very useful. And of course, they can't use their Spirit Link to get more Mega Groudon, so they'd have to lose a turn to Mega Evolve. So my point is, the Groudon player sits there, even if they've got Hex Maniac every turn, yeah, they can maybe have one-hit KO if they get a stadium down before you attack with Giratina. But then they're out of strong energy. They're out, they get one attack with stadiums. if they don't get any evolutions early, then they're not able to use evolutions, or at least not without losing a turn. And the whole time you sit there with a muscle band and 2-hit KO. Against something like Mega Rayquaza, exactly the same deal. They can't use Sky Arrow, so they can't get 180 HP KO, as long as you use your stadium to get rid of Sky Arrow and then keep attacking with Giratina. So they have essentially maybe 1 KO with Sky Arrow before you start attacking with Giratina, and then there's no double colourless, there's no Spirit Link, etc, etc. So really good matchups against Mega EX decks, or any, you come across Vespiquen. Well, Vespiquen ain't going to do much if they can't play double colourless energy. But here's the thing with Giratina. Even something like Lucario. Yeah, Lucario can get going much faster than you, but when you're blocking their stadiums and their strong energy and their muscle bands, they ain't going to be doing very much. Big problem is it attacks for 4 energy. Now, we've talked about this before, and last time I might have been on a video on my YouTube channel, I inadvertently said he could use Mega Turbo, which is clearly rubbish. He's not a Mega EX. So there's 3 ways to play Giratina. I'm going to run through them now. Number 1, the speed list. This revolves around, shockingly, Double Dragon energy. But then you use the Roaring Skies Reshiram to attach fire energy. And if you've got a really good list, or you draw lucky more likely, you can put down a fire energy with Reshiram, switch to another Reshiram, put down a fire energy, attach Double Dragon as your attachment for the turn, and then get going on turn 1. Now, again, I mentioned this a couple of times. There was some idiot on the internet a little while ago boasting about how he's got a list that always turn 1 Giratinas. I would love that list. But the reality is that if you come up against, Giratina's not perfect. And if you come across something which can counter it, more on that in a moment, then you're in trouble. Because you've only really got the Giratina. I don't like that list. Number 2, and this is what started doing well quite early on, Giratina Vileplume. So Vileplume makes sure they've never got any item cards, including tools, and then Giratina goes, oh, and no special energy, and no stadiums. So all they can play is basic energy, supporters, and Pokemon. Really shuts you down. But again, it's a little bit slow, and it's easily countered by certain things, and then you can't win. I like this deck. Because let's not forget, you can put in stuff like a Miltank, which attacks for 1 energy, or you can put any basic energy you like. So you could even put something in like a Lucario EX and some basic fighting energy. Or, essentially anything you want. You could, and the energy would start to get very annoying here, but you could even put something in like, I don't know, a Regice and play Water, Double Colourless and Double Dragon. Again, the energy line would be difficult on that one. And the third way, and this, I've heard of people wanting to keep this secret. Sorry, boys and girls, the cat's out of the bag. A fairly well-known Pokemon channel not only put a video about this up a week or so ago, but also referred to it as, in his opinion, the best deck in Standard. I did record some games with this deck at the Norwich League Challenge, so you'll get to see it in action. Aromatisse Giratina. You use Xerneas to put energy on the board, Aromatisse to move it around, and you attack with Giratina. You can use AZ to heal yourself. Remember, we're getting Max Potion in Breakthrough. I think we're getting Max Potion in Break. I need to double check. I don't know if we are. Let me check while we're here. And, which of course isn't legal for a little while yet. No, we're not getting Max Potion in Breakthrough. People thought we were, but we're not. I'm sorry, I was thinking about a conversation I had with somebody. We're not getting Max Potion in Breakthrough. But you've still got AZ. Remember, Double Dragon does count as Fairy when it's attached to a Dragon Pokemon. So if you've got 2 Giratinas out, you can move the energy off, etc, etc. And then what you can do is heal and move it around and get going and use other attackers like Lugia as a modern-day Mewtwo. And it's exactly like it was. A little bit slower, maybe, this build. Vileplume's slower, but you're trainer locking them, so it kind of makes up for it. Here, you're going to have a, turn 2, turn 3 Giratina if you draw well. So it's not all that and a bag of potato chips, but it's certainly not horrific. It's not horrific. It's not amazing, but it's horrific. So, it's very, very useful. And of course, the second you start playing any of these fairy decks, options open up. Any dragon Pokemon is now potentially in. It's going well. And actually, while we're here, a very similar kind of deck, that Tyrantrum deck I was telling you about, could just as easily be a Giratina deck. Using the Bronzong to get the Metal Energy to pay the 2 colourless cost, and double Dragon to pay the Dragon cost, and then you can play the Giratina like that, and then you've got access to your Edgeslash and your Dialga and all of that. So there's a lot of good ways to play this, with Vileplume, with Bronzong, with Aromatisse, or a speed list using Double Dragon and using the Reshiram from Roaring Skies. It's got some very, very good matchups, so let's look at the problems. It's got 4 Double Dragon energy, and other than Bunnelby, there's no way to recycle it. Although Giratina players just play a Bunnelby. Xerosic, Enhanced Hammer, except in the Vileplume list, where obviously you can't play Enhanced Hammer against you, unless they play a Hexmaniac first to turn off the Vileplume. So, it is very vulnerable to getting the energy knocked off. But if you've got some backup attackers, you can get around it. If you don't, you're going to lose. I played against in Sheffield, I played against the Giratina deck. And had I had the free Enhanced Hammer, my opponent would only have had Lugia and Noniec Xerneas. I'm fairly certain I can take those down quite easily with Mind Shao. But I didn't. I didn't have the Enhanced Hammer, so I couldn't win. Nothing I could do. Hey ho, these things happen. My own fault, shouldn't have changed my deck list, because the Trainer's Mail I put in their stead did absolutely nothing. It's weak to Fairy, which means any Fairy deck will slice through it like butter. Hexmaniac can give some of these Mega EX decks a chance against it. And then there's things like Lucario Bats, which can just plain outspeed it. You're talking free energy attachments if you use Double Dragon energy. And that's slow. That's very slow. And then you're in this silly position where, your opponent's hitting you for potentially 90 damage on turn 1, and you're sitting there going, oh, darn it. Yeah. Plus, some of the builds I've seen are needlessly slow, but I don't want to go into details about how. I've got my own list of this. Am I going to play it for regionals? Probably not. Knowing me, I'm going to turn up to the first regionals with Mind Shao, regardless of the fact that the list which everyone uses and everyone plays with, which mine's fairly similar, and mine's got Shauna Tierno, which, as I've said, is, in my opinion, far superior. I can't remember if I had that rant last week, but I'm going to assume I did. Shauna, better than Tierno in every deck, including Mind Shao. And essentially, it's not as consistent as it could be, but it's got really good matchups against almost everything when it sets up. I like it against Rayquaza, I love it against Groudon, I love it against Vespiquen, I like it against Giratina if you're playing Enhanced Hammer. I like it against Vileplume Regice, assuming they don't get a turn 1 Vileplume. I really like it. So yeah, good stuff coming your way. Love Mind Shao, but the reality is it's not very consistent. I'll still probably end up playing it because it's really hard to, and this is the problem with, doing like I do in terms of really wanting to do all the commentary and the YouTube and all like that. I'm not going to be upset if I don't make Top Cut at Huddersfield Regionals, because if I don't make Top Cut, I get to go commentate. So it's going to be really difficult to sit there being like, have to win to make Top Cut. Because I love this game for playing and commentating and meeting friends, not just winning. It's very much a secondary concern, which I think puts me in the minority, which makes me really sad. Anyway, where was I? Yeah, Giratina. Vulnerable to 0/6 Enhanced Hammer, weak to Fairies, little bit slow, and against something like Aromatisse, they take out your Aromatisse. Against something like Bronzong, they take out your Bronzong. And you don't have much. You need a secondary attacker. And when people are running around with Lugia, I'm just not sure. And remember, Lugia can't use Double Dragon energy, so you can't do the piling DCE on like you would for Mewtwo. There is clearly a lot of potential there. There are clearly ways to play it. It's clearly going to cut at some of these regionals. Is it amazing? I think it could be. I am currently unconvinced. So let's finish off with a couple of emails. And fast becoming my favourite listener, Remy Cogno, he's gone and done the kind of stuff that I usually do when I've got time on my hands. He's gone to Pokemon.com And he looked at all 48 deck lists from all 6 regionals. Pokemon.com have put the top 8 deck lists from all 6 regionals, making 48. And he sent me a list of fun facts, which I want to share with you guys, because this is awesome. And cheers, Remy, this is absolutely fantastic. Only 24 EXs were used. I think 24 EXs were used. That's still quite... I mean, it's nowhere near all of them, but still quite a lot. More interestingly, only 3 Mega EXs were used. The only Mega EXs used were Groudon, Manectric, and Rayquaza. The only EX not legal last year that saw play in Expanded was Kyogre, who of course comes from Dark Explorers. The only non-EX Pokemon that were not legal last year that saw play in Expanded, because remember, Expanded this year goes further than Standard last year, goes further back, were Trubbish, the Garbage Collection one, Archeops, the 70 HP Bronzor, because you always want the biggest HP on those basics that are going to evolve, and Junk Hunt Sableye, because he's amazing. And the only trainers that were not legal last year that saw play were Pokemon Communication, Super Odd, which is coming back, Dark Patch, which is amazing, and Tropical Beach. And he points out that Excelgor, Electric, Musharna, and Venusaur didn't make cut at all. Well, I mean, Musharna's mostly good in the Excelgor deck, so if Excelgor didn't cut, it doesn't surprise me that Musharna didn't. Electric, yeah, there was that good list I told you about that played the Dragon Rayquaza with the colourless Mega, but apparently it's just not good enough. So there we go. Some fun little facts from Remy there, and I thank you very, very much for the email. Nick Huggins was a chap who got in touch to tell me about the Empoleon mistake I told you about earlier. Sorry about that. And I got a really interesting email from Aban Ahmed. Now, I disagree with his email, but I love his email, so I'm going to share it with you. And he said he doesn't normally get frustrated or disagree with things I said on the podcast, but he disagreed with something I said last week. And rather than send him a quick reply, I thought it would be nice to give him a quick, to go through it on the podcast so I can explain myself. He played Sablegarb in British Columbia in seniors and made it to top 8. Congratulations to you, sir. Now, he took offence, that's the wrong word. He took exception to my, assertion last week that Blastoise wrecks Sablegarb. Remember I told you last week that with Blastoise not doing well in weeks 2 and 3, that meant that Sableye Garbodor could do well in weeks 2 and 3, and it couldn't do well in week 1 because it was full of Blastoise and it got wrecked by Blastoise. Apparently, he says wrecked is the word I used. It's a word I use a lot, so sounds like the kind of word I would have used. He put this: Blastoise has to get a 4-piece Stoys up with Sablegarb Lysandras multiple times. Blastoise run a maximum of 2 Floatstone. You might not think that a turn 2 Garb is not guaranteed, but with 4 Trainers Mail it is very close to guaranteed. I might not be qualified to give insights on matchups. I did top 4 Worlds in 2013. Pretty good. I want to know if that was in juniors or seniors, so get back in touch, sir. So I like to think I'm qualified to talk about matchups. Absolutely, sir. You top 4'd World, even if that was in juniors, that's still pretty darned impressive. I disagree with you, but then this is what the agreements are for. I've played the match a few times. Here's the thing. The Stoice doesn't ever get Lysandra'd up, because the Stoice is your attacker. Blastoise KOs a Sableye quite easily. So you would never want to go ahead and use Blastoise to get Caldeo rolling. And I think there is probably, if you get 4 energy, which is the minimum on Blastoise, it does 100 damage. And I think this is probably something we need to talk about. I think against average Blastoise players, I think a good Sablegarb will beat an average Blastoise. But if you get a really good Blastoise and a really good Sablegarb, I like Blastoise. And by the way, email ptcgradio@hotmail.co.uk, tweet me at the Wassy, let me know how you fall down on this side of the argument, people. Let's get a bit of a poll going on here. I would never attack with Caldeo and leave the Garbodor to be, the Blastoise to be dragged up. I would just want to get a Blastoise out. And then you've got your Blastoise sitting there, and then you can go ahead and just use Deluge over and over again and use Hydro Pump. The other thing you do is you just hammer down energy onto the Blastoise as fast as you can. So that way, you just sit there attacking with Blastoise. Now I know you might have another Pokemon that you start with and then get the Blastoise, but you're probably playing an AZ or something like that you can use to pick it up, and then you just go aggro Blastoise. Now, you're probably, I think it's fairly likely you're going to be playing at least one of your, maybe one, what do we call it, startling Megaphone. Because Blastoise is going to be vulnerable to something like a Garbodor. So, you pile all your energy down, and then you just KO the Sableye. Not only that, but you're going to be playing Lysandra, and Blastoise is incredibly consistent. So every time you hit the Lysandra, you're going to bring up the Garbodor. And I suppose it's not really about whether you can get a turn 1 Garbodor, it's about whether you can keep Garbodor out. Because as soon as you don't have Garbodor, a combination of Keldeo and Blastoise will utterly wreck you using Rush In and Deluge. So it's about, can you keep the Garbodor out? And as fast as you get Garbodor, every Lysandra is going to be used to bring up and KO a Garbodor, and Garbodor won't last long. You can even just use Blastoise to really simplify the game, so you're just sitting there attacking with Blastoise. Rather than leaving the Stoise to be Lysandra'd up, I would try and put 4 energy on a Blastoise, 3 energy on a Keldeo, and then just sit there. I don't care what's active. If my Keldeo's active, I'm getting a KO on everything. If my Blastoise is active, I'm getting a KO on everything. Even with Deluge turned off, I can still attach an energy per turn, and using Superior Energy Retrieval, I can get 4 in hand and guarantee, and I'm going to be playing a bunch of them, and guarantee that I've got an attachment for 4 turns in a row, which means you're going to need to use a Team Flare Grunt and hit heads on a Crushing Hammer in 1 turn to slow me down. And that's assuming I've got the exact right amount of energy on. Because any turn my Sablgarb opponent doesn't hit an energy removal card, I'm putting another energy on. And I've got 11 energy cards in my deck. I'm going to be trying to get all of them out very, very quickly. Let's not forget, I'm going to be playing Professor's Letter, so I can search for these cards, just in case you're trying some kind of trick shovel shenanigans. Now, the problem with Theory Modding, like I'm doing, is always this. Because my opponent can sit, because person who I'm talking to, and I'm talking to nobody, but if I was, somebody could go, oh yes, but I'm just going to do this, and I'm going to do that, and you can't assume perfect setups. Here's what we can assume. Blastoise sets up on turn 1 more often than not, as we saw on the stream from Fort Wayne Regionals, on the stream with players that did very, very well, they did not get the ideal setup on turn 1. Blastoise gets a turn 1 setup more often than Sableye does. I'm sorry, it just does. Not only that, but if the Blastoise goes first, they can have 2 turns of setting up before you can possibly get your Garbodor, because I've seen no Sablgarb list that plays Wally. Which means that it's turn 2 Garb, by which point as the Blastoise player, I've had 2 turns to set up and get all my energy down. In which case, I am going to get an attack every single turn, and I'm going to get a KO every single turn, unless you get the Garbodor with a Float Stone and the Team Flare Grunt and the Pokemon and the Crushing Hammers and keep hitting heads. And that's a lot to ask for. I think Blastoise needs less. I could be wrong, you could disagree, that's fine. When I've played the matchup, I found it to be quite heavily in Blastoise's favour. Let me know on Twitter @TheWassy if you agree. The other thing I would say, and this is more, these are both true, it doesn't necessarily mean that one caused the other. In Week 1, Blastoise was huge, Sablgarb was nowhere to be found. In weeks 2 and 3, Sablgarb became one of the best decks. Blastoise massively dropped in numbers due to the large amount of counters played for it. That could be a coincidence, but let's not pretend like Sablgarb is some amazing new secret deck which was only played for the first time in week 2 of regionals. It was played at Worlds a couple of years ago. Everyone knows about, or competitive players know about Sablgarb. Maybe you agree, maybe you don't. That's fine. This is what the game's built on. Disagreements. It's fun that way. I hope that answered your question, sir. If you still disagree, that's absolutely fine. That's not to say I'm always right about everything. I have tested the matchup. I'm not theory modding here. Everything I've told you here isn't, this is what I think's going to happen. It's, what's happened against me when I've played as Sablegarb, and what I've done against my opponent when I've played against Sablegarb. I have generally had success with Blastoise, and when I've been playing Sablegarb, I've not wanted to see a Blastoise. Simple as that. And I think that'll do it, ladies and gentlemen. This will hopefully be up on Wednesday morning, which means you'll have a slightly earlier podcast. No videos this week on my YouTube channel, but they'll be coming soon. Don't worry your pretty little heads about it. In the meantime, get yourself over to youtube.com/PTCGRadio, where you can find a whole bunch of videos to amuse you in the meantime. And let's not forget, you can find a complete archive of all the episodes of PTCG Radio at ptcgradio.wordpress.com. If you want to add anything to the discussion, correct me on anything, or just say hello, you can find me on Twitter at the Wassy, or on email at ptcgradio@hotmail.co.uk. I'm trying to give a few more plugs to the WordPress, to the email, because I've had a whole bunch of correspondence on YouTube and stuff and Twitter from people saying, do you have an email address, and where can I find all the back episodes? So I don't think I've made it as explicitly as I could in previous podcasts. I'm trying to change it now. We will be back next week, where I'm going to be looking at the standard format and all the decks you should be looking at for standard format tournaments in advance of the first set of regionals in the UK and in other countries as well. And I might even look at some Pokemon tools if I get a chance, and you're very, very lucky. As always, thank you very much for listening to this. Look after yourselves until next week. My name is Ross, and you've been listening to PTCG Radio.